Checking if I can see myself. I think I can. Checking if I can see myself. I can. I think I can. All right. Looks like I'm live. Let me go into YouTube here. Bear with me. This is the first time I have done a live stream, and I'm using some new software that I have not used before, and using a camera capture setup I haven't used before, and doing a Drupal migration that I have not seen before, not done before. So let's see. Trying to see if I can get the chat. Oh, here's a live chat thing. In case somebody wants to send a message so that I can at least see it. All right. If anyone, it looks like there's a few people watching as far as I can tell. Yes. So Parth just asked, isn't it supposed to start today? That is what is supposed to happen, yes. I just want to make sure that everything is working correctly so that it's actually able to be seen by people who are watching it. So if you can see my screen and jeffgeerling.com, please can you type a message in chat and say yes, it's working? I think it should be. It looks like it is. I have my iPad out and it looks like it's working there. All right, perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. There's probably going to be a few people trickling in and watching this first stream. I don't expect, if I had one person watching, I'd be ecstatic because it would mean somebody's learning from the process that I'm going through and not nobody. But I'm also going to be recording all these videos and they'll be on YouTube afterwards. So the intention is eventually there will be a series of these videos for anyone else that's considering migrating a Drupal 7 site to Drupal 8. And one of the first things that I do for almost every Drupal project, Ansible project, anything that I'm working on, is I'll start writing a blog post. A lot of people ask me, they go to my blog and they see all these posts that I do on things, and they wonder, like, how do you have the time to write all these while you're also doing the work? The reason I have the time is because while I'm doing the work, I write it down on my blog. It's kind of like my documentation place. So as you can see, I already have posted a little snippet of a blog post here. And as we go along, I'll be updating this post and I'll be adding links to each of these live stream episodes. And since we're 5 minutes in, I guess I will go ahead and get started. I'm gonna get things set up today. A couple little, not ground rules, but things that I'm just noting at the beginning here. This is the first time I've done any Drupal 8 migration work since Drupal 8.2. And we're in 8.8 right now, soon to be 8.9, I guess. And that was in 2016, so that's like 4 years ago. So a lot has changed, I know, because I follow a lot of the migration issues on Drupal.org. And we'll see how much that affects the ease of use of migrating and all that kind of stuff. This is also the first time I've done any Drupal 8 work for about a year and a half, something like that. I've been working a lot with automation and cloud computing and that kind of stuff. And right now I'm doing a lot of work with Ansible. And the work that I've done in Drupal has kind of tailed off a little bit just because of the things that I'm working on. So this will be a fun way to get back in, maybe be able to share some knowledge that I've been kind of storing in a box in my brain. This is also the first time I've ever done live streaming. So it looks like my computer is not crashing yet, but I haven't started installing anything with Composer. Once we do that, the computer will likely start to think about crashing. You can always look up here in the top. You can see this little CPU graph. When these lines get up to the top, that means it's about time for the computer to crash. That's my best guess. So let's get started. The first thing that I need to do, so this is jeffgeerling.com. It's running on a DigitalOcean server. I have a local code base for it and it's stored in Git and everything. And for most projects, what I would do is I would take that code base for Drupal 7 and create a branch of it for Drupal 8. and start working on it there. And there's two different ways you can do it. You can do that, create a branch and start migrating all of your code and all that kind of stuff. For this particular site, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. It's more of a green field or clean way of migrating, where I'm going to build a new site in Drupal 8. Excuse me for a second while I turn off my heater, because it's apparently like burning up my room. Sometimes if I forget I have it on, it gets up to 75, 76 in here. So anyway, I'm going to build this new Drupal 8 site and build the migration in it, build a new theme, and then everything will come across from the old site to the new site. And I'm going to have a separate code base. And I'm doing this for two reasons. One is it's a little bit easier that way. The other reason is my old code base is inherited from, I think, Drupal 6.3 or 6.4 or something. It's a very old code base. And it's also hosted on a private Git server that's kind of difficult to deal with and things like that. And I could push that up to GitHub or something, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start a new fresh code base and start a new fresh Drupal 8 site. We're going to build out the initial parts of the site today, hopefully, if Composer doesn't blow up. And then we'll see how far we get into actually working on any migration today. But I'll be doing this every Tuesday indefinitely until it's done. So we'll keep going from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to build a Drupal code base. And I'm going to host it on GitHub. So I have a GitHub account. I have a developer account or something. I pay a little bit of money each month for it. And so I can create private repositories. So I'm going to create a new private repository for my code base. And I'll call this jeffgeerling.com, well, -com, code for jeffgeerling.com. Drupal, I'll call it Drupal code base for jeffgeerling.com, private. And I'll just create an empty blank repository. So now I have an empty repository. I'm going to grab the Git URL for it. And the reason I do this, so for every project that I create, whether it's Ansible or Drupal or almost anything else, if it's like a media project, sometimes I don't use Git for it. But any project I create, I always create a Git repository first, because I always want to be able to track every step that I did in case I have a problem or something like that. I can always go back. So the first thing I do is I create the repository. It's on GitHub here. I'm going to go into my sites directory. That's where I keep all my code bases. I'm going to I'm going to clone this repository that I just created. Actually, I'm not going to clone it. What I'm going to do in this case is I'll create the code base and then I'll push it up. So let's see, to create that code base, I'm going to use the Drupal, this actually just happened, I think, in Drupal 8.7, no, 8.8, I think. There's a new way to create Drupal code bases using an official Drupal Composer template. And I have this documented in a repository. I have Drupal for Kubernetes. It's also, if you go to drupal.org, install, use Composer to install or manage Drupal. The instructions are here too. It shows you how to download Drupal core using Drupal recommended projects. So that's basically what we're going to do. I'm just going to follow along the directions that I set up here, because I'm also going to be using Docker for a local development environment. And I'll show you how that sets up too. So this is a project that I've been using for running Drupal on Kubernetes on a cluster of Raspberry Pis. There's plenty of information on that if you go to pydramble.com. We won't go there today. But I'm going to start a new Drupal project, and I'll just grab this command, composer create project, and it's going to grab Drupal using all the recommended Drupal project structure layout and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to do that inside my sites folder, and I'm going to call it the same as my GitHub repository name, which is jeffgeerling-com. So jeffgeerling-com. And Composer is now going to take over the rest of my CPU cycles. And it looks like the stream is actually still working, so it's not using all the CPU, but a lot of it. You can probably hear my fan in the background if you turn up the audio pretty loud. But it's going to grab all the dependencies that Drupal recommends for a standard Drupal 8 project. Should take not too long, I hope. We have a pretty fast internet connection, so the downloads are pretty fast. It's just when Composer, a lot of people wonder, why is Composer so slow? And the reason for that a lot of times is Composer is looking at dependency trees that have thousands and thousands of interdependencies, and it has to resolve all that. So that's why it uses a lot of RAM, and a lot of times it's pretty slow. So it gets a bad rap, but it does do a pretty good job of it compared to some other dependency management systems. After you install this template, it even gives you some helpful information on how to get started with Drupal, which is nice. In the past, it was kind of like download it and then you have all these files and you're like, I don't know what to do. You might read the install.txt and it's not all that wonderful. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here. Since I have this code base, I'm going to go into jeffgeerling.com, and I'm going to say git init to create a Git repository. You can use a graphical interface for Git too. I just use the command line because it's more familiar and faster once you start memorizing the commands. That's going to create a new Git repository in this code base. And then I'm going to go back over to jeffgeerling.com, and GitHub gives you the instructions for how to do things. So I have a new repository. I'm going to also, Sublime Text lets you open a full directory in Sublime Text. So I'm going to open this up in my text editor, Sublime Text, and I'm going to create a README file. So the first thing I always do is create a Git repository. Second thing I always do is create a README file. And the README file is where I'm going to say, what is this project? How do I get started with it? What are some things I'm working on? Where's resources for how to figure it out? So in the README, I'm going to say jeffgeerling.com Drupal codebase is the title of this README. This is the Drupal codebase that powers jeffgeerling.com. And then I'll just leave it like that for now, because this is just a kind of a scaffold README. We'll fill it in a lot more later. readme.md for Markdown, and save that. The other thing I'm going to do, the Drupal project template doesn't include a git ignore file, which is kind of bad. If you look into, I think I have it hidden in here. Let me open this folder. Oh, it opened. Where did it open? There it is. If you look in here, there's a vendor directory. I actually hide the vendor directory in Sublime Text because you generally don't want to be messing around in the vendor directory. That's managed by Composer. This vendor directory has thousands and thousands of files, and a lot of them you don't want to have. Usually you don't want to have any of it in your code base, in your Git code base, because you want Composer to manage that directory, and you want to have that be part of your website when it's running and also when you're developing. But there are some problems if you put it in your code base, because when you're developing, you might have some dependencies, like let's say devel, the devel module, you might use that. You don't want that to be on a production site. But if you commit the vendor directory, you might accidentally commit that code into your code base, and then it would be up on your production server and could lead to security issues. There's other reasons too for not having it. But the problem is, if I say git status, it's going to say, oh, there's this vendor directory I want to add. We don't want that vendor directory. At least I don't. Sometimes there are valid reasons to include it, but in my case, I'm not going to. So the Drupal project template right now doesn't ship a git ignore file. So I need to create a git ignore file. So I'm going to create a new file called .gitignore. I think that's not the file name. Let me save this and call it .gitignore. Save. And I'm going to ignore a few directories. I'm going to look, there's a template somewhere for this, but I'm just going to look in here at this Drupal for Kubernetes code base and grab what it has. Gitignore. Because you don't want to commit all these different files that you don't need, that shouldn't be in your project. So I'm going to grab all this and make sure that that's in there. So there's things like the vendor directory, you don't want that. The core directory, because that's managed by Composer as well. The modules directory is inside of the Drupal code base, which is inside of web. So this web has all the Drupal code. You don't want any settings files. If you accidentally, like when you're setting up your website locally, it creates a settings file. If you push that up to your production server with your local settings, you're going to take down your production server. So you don't want that in your code base. You also don't want your files directory, because when you're uploading files and things locally, those shouldn't be in your code base. They should exist on the server and be stored and backed up separately. Also, simple test. If you're running tests locally, you don't want that folder to be in there. And there's some other things too. Save this file. All right, so now if I say git status, since I added that vendor directory to gitignore, it doesn't have it in this list of untracked files that it wants to track. So now I'm ready to create this Git repository that has my Drupal codebase. I just noticed there's a chat message that says, Jeff, are we starting anytime soon? It looks interesting. So I'm streaming, and it looks like there's a chat, but the chat is for a different stream. Oh. So I'm streaming from this OBS software, and there's a chat for the scheduled stream that I had started. And it looks like the two are not together. So I must have done something wrong with the way that I set up the stream. I'm going to keep going on here, but I'm going to copy out the link to the right stream here. So bear with me for those of you who are actually seeing the stream. I'm going to copy this link out and paste it into the people who are watching the stream. So I'm going to go here. You can see all the preferences that YouTube has shown me on my, what is it called, the algorithm. And let me pause this so I don't all of a sudden get some weird stuff going on. All right. All right, so that should be working. So there's 12 people watching this one, and it looks like there's a few people waiting on the other one. I'm going to try to figure out how I can get, I guess I can just pop, yeah, I can pop this chat out. So I'm going to pop that one out here, and then, yeah, so the YouTube interface for this is not wonderful. All right. Okay, so sorry about that little delay there. So I got the gitignore set up. For those of you who are just joining in this stream now that I pasted the link into the other stream, let me also make sure if I go to, let me go to LinkedIn. No, I'll go to YouTube. Sorry. As it's my first time ever doing the stream thing, I must have grabbed the wrong link somewhere, the wrong stream parameter, and set up a new stream instead of doing that scheduled one. If I go to my channel, so there's my current live stream. So they don't have like a streaming section in here. They have YouTube Studio, which is, I guess it's good for some people, but it has a lot of weird stuff in it that doesn't make sense to me. The interface, that is. Manage. So this says upcoming. I don't know how to so if I go here, hopefully at least the sidebar will show. I'll show that chat message. Okay. All right, so the people in here, so there's 17 people waiting. I just don't know how to get, I don't know how to get this to actually pick things up. Hopefully the people who see this stream will click on this link and come over to the other stream. So, all right, so I'll get back to things just so we don't waste a ton of time on this current video. I wasted 4 minutes on that, but oh well. So we created our new Drupal project. We added a gitignore file because Drupal's project template currently doesn't have one of those. And now it's time to commit all the files. So we created the fresh project, and I want to make sure that everything is super fresh and in the first commit, and that's going to be our initial Drupal 8 commit. I haven't installed Drupal yet. I haven't done anything with the code. I haven't started working on migrations, but I want to have that first step in the history along with this little README file that has nothing in it of consequence, but at least it has a description of what the project is. So I'm going to say git add -a. That's going to add everything. I'm going to say git status to see what it added. So it added, your code base is not going to be all that much because it's not all of Drupal's code in it. It's a reference to say, I want Drupal and I want this module and I want that module and these dependencies. That's all in your composer .json file, and your composer.lock gives you the specific version of each of those. So it's nice because your code base is going to be super tiny on GitHub and in your Git code base. Very easy to work with. And then your individual people who develop with it, so in my case just me, but if you have a team of people working on it, they will install the dependencies on their computer. That creates a little complication here and there, but it's something that is kind of part of the complexity of the web nowadays. You have Node.js and Ruby and all these different languages and systems that you use. You're going to have to manage dependencies. So we have all this stuff. I'm going to say git commit -m initial commit that's Drupal 8. Whoops. 8.8 project. Recommended project template, something like that. And then now if I say git pushed to push it up, Git doesn't know where to push it. So I need to go over to my new GitHub repository, and I'm going to say git remote add origin, because this will be the GitHub origin. Now, this is another thing that, if you're starting out with Git, there's a lot of different bits of Git that are going to be super confusing. If I were working on a team, we would have a repository, like a central one that the team all works from, and then each of us would have a fork. So I would actually fork that repository, then I would clone my fork, and then I would add another upstream for GitHub and all these different things. For now, we'll just deal with one Git repository, and it'll be the origin, which is like the default repository for Git. So I'm going to add that. The origin for this Git repository is GitHub, and then push my master branch. That's the default branch that I'm on. I'm going to push that up to GitHub, and after it pushes, GitHub will now show the README file here. So you can see it's the jeffgeerling.com Drupal codebase. At this point, I have a Drupal codebase, and you could install Drupal from it. I'm going to follow through on some of the other steps here to get a local environment and install Drupal and all that kind of stuff. I also need to have drush. Drush is going to be really helpful for command line things like doing migrations, installing Drupal, reinstalling Drupal. One of the things that you'll see me do a lot is probably reinstall Drupal like 100 times. And the key is to make it so it's super fast and easy and automated, because if it's not, you don't do it as much. But if you do it a lot, then you're going to end up with a much more structured, stable code base. So I'm going to require drush in this project, because I'm going to use drush for all kinds of things, including running cron on production and things like that. So we're going to need drush. That's going to take a little while because the composer has to look at all of drush's dependencies and all my site dependencies and mix them all together and hopefully come up with drush being installed correctly. Sometimes when you do something like this, it'll say like composer can't install drush, and you're like, wait, what? Why not? I think there's a command, I think it's called composer y. Is that what it is? Nah. Composer why not, or something like that. I actually have an article about this. Composer why not. And you can see why exactly it's not installing something like, oh, this other dependency is not allowing me to install or upgrade Drupal or do whatever. Here it is. Installing this. Yeah, so one time I tried updating Drupal core and it was like, I can't do that. It's composer prohibits, that's what it is. There might be a why or why not or something like that, but composer prohibits shows you like, I can't do this because of all these things. So it ends up, sometimes you can get in a little complexity there. but read my blog posts on it and hopefully they'll help a little bit. So it finally resolved all those dependencies. My CPU is not yet crashing. And now it is doing all the little cleanup work. And it's always good to just glance through these messages. So it's saying like there's some suggested things that you could use, but we don't really need those things. And then also it's saying that there's some old stuff that drush, some of the dependencies that drush has depends on something that's abandoned or old or something. So, you know, you might want to look into how can I help people get that fixed so that it's not using these old things. But that happens. I have a Node.js app that I manage that has probably 300 abandoned projects that it uses. Oops. That is the world of using other people's code. People abandon it. So we created a git ignore file. We have drush now, so what I'm going to do is git diff, and you'll see that the changes that Git has done are in composer.json, so it added drush as a dependency, and then it updated the composer lock file with all the things. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are all the things that drush requires, so it added those. So if I say git status, it'll show that there's just changes to composer.json and composer.lock. I'm going to say git add all. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. There, now you can maybe actually see what I'm doing instead of just my face. And let me make that bigger too so you can see it a little better, because I'm sure some of you are not on a giant monitor. So what I was doing was I just showed the things that, let's see, git diff staged. So these are the changes. So in composer.json, it just added drush since I required it. And then it added all of drush's dependencies in the composer.lock file. So now that I've added them, I always run git status before I do a commit just to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So I say git commit -m added drush to codebase, git push. And now if I go back to my codebase on GitHub, you'll see that the latest commit is adding drush to the codebase, and all that had to change was composer.json and composer.lock. So let's see what's next on this. So I'm going to build this site using a Docker environment, and hopefully we'll have enough time to start getting into things once we have that running, but sometimes it takes a little time to get the Docker containers spun up and all that. So I'm going to grab a Docker file and a Docker compose that I use for a lot of my Drupal projects. There's actually like 1,000 ways that you can do this. You could use, so there's like doxel, ddev, lando. There's a lot of different Docker environments that are kind of like turnkey Docker environments for your Drupal development. Sometimes I use these, sometimes I don't. For a simple project like this, I'm not going to end up using it because I don't need like 50 different integrations and debuggers and all that kind of stuff. I just need to run a Drupal site that is pretty darn simple. But there's ddev and not that lando, the Drupal lando. So ddev is another pretty good one that a lot of people end up using. Of course, I also maintain Drupal VM, not .co/m. Someday I'll learn how to type. So I also maintain Drupal VM, but this one, like I tell a lot of people, Drupal VM is great if you really need that level of customizability in your environment. And I use it for a lot of older projects, especially if they use varnish and other things that I need to really tweak. But again, this is a pretty simple site. I'm just going to use a standard a Drupal Docker image that is pretty easy to use. So I'm going to grab this Docker file from Drupal for Kubernetes, and I'm going to use my Drupal image, which all it is it has a few little tweaks to it. If you want to get into it sometime, maybe I'll go through like the way I set up my Drupal image and my Apache base image and all that. But for now, I'm just going to grab this Docker file that I use for the Raspberry Pi Dramble code base, and I'm going to put it into here. So paste that in and make sure that everything is good. I should probably change this. So I'm going to put to do change this. None of this is live code, so you can't hack me right now. Well, hopefully you can't. Please don't try hacking me. Let's see. Whoa. Docker file. All right, so I have not Docker file, that Docker file, just Docker file. Okay, so there's my Docker file, and I'm going to create a Docker compose file. I already had that open apparently. And I'm going to grab it from here. And this is just, it's running two containers on my computer. One is running the Drupal container, and the other one is running a MySQL container for the database. Eventually, I'm also going to be doing Solr because jeffgeerling.com, not Jeff, let me go over here. jeffgeerling.com actually has Solr search. So if you do any kind of searching, it actually uses a backend, which is run by hosted Apache Solr. This is not a sponsored live stream, but if I did, I could sponsor it myself, I guess. Oh, that looks bad. This looks like a bug here. Anyway, it's using a Solr backend for the site search, and it works pretty well because if you're like earlier, you saw me searching for composer stuff. If you tune Solr well, it's kind of magic like Google where you search anything and you're finding the right stuff. So anyway, I'm going to save this as Docker compose so I can have a local environment. Let's see, save that. And I'm going to call this, I'm actually going to call this Jeff Geerling. Wait, it's jeffgeerling-com. It's also nice. I like to do this anytime I reference a site. I use what I call a machine name, which is like all lowercase with underscores and dashes. That way you're just consistent everywhere. Like anytime I do something, or if I'm running something on my computer, I'm like, what is this? If I see, oh, jeffgeerling.com, I know it's jeffgeerling.com, that code base. So I'm going to call it that. Let's see. So in here, I want to build this image. I'm going to call it jeffgeerling-com-latest. So another thing that I'm going to do, so I'm starting to get into things that are custom for this project. So I changed this image name from what I copied out of a template that I have in my Drupal for Kubernetes. It doesn't matter where you're getting it from. But this is now customized, and I want to make sure that I can do this again when I need to. And if I copied this command, it would build a Drupal-4-Kubernetes, which is not the right thing for my Docker compose file. So I'm going to put in here, I'm going to put a new section, local environment. And I'm going to say, make sure you have Docker installed, then run the following commands. And first you're going to do Docker build, spaces, -t, and then I'm going to call it jeffgeerling-com-latest, and then the current directory. And I'm going to put in the current directory, in the same directory as this README file. So that's going to build the Docker image. And then you're going to run the Docker compose environment, Docker compose, and this all presupposes that you have Docker installed. So I have Docker desktop running on my Mac. You could use Docker machine. You could use other types of Docker environments too. And there's actually a lot of arguments for and against using the Docker CE for Mac for speed and performance. And we might get into some of those with doing a live stream. But anyway, for now, for simplicity, I'm just running Docker for Mac. Docker compose up-d, and that's going to start the environment. So let me save this. README. Run the following command. So I'm going to try this out and see if it works to build the environment, build the Docker image. And the way that this Docker image works is it's going to set a few variables. Oh, I need to put it to do. So another thing that I'm going to do in a lot of these videos is if I ever am working on code and I don't know, I know that I need to do something, but I don't want to spend 5 or 10 minutes right now doing it because that's boring. Although right now Docker's building, so it could take a while. I'm going to throw a to-do in the code, and then that way, if I'm ever working on cleaning up things, and always before the end of a project or before the end of a large chunk of it, I'll do a full search on the code base and search for to-do. And it's funny, there's the to-dos in Drupal's code base, but I could do a search just within this folder, or just search in my custom modules or something like that for to-dos. And I know immediately I need to fix this, like, and then I also, put what I need to do here. So I'm going to say to-do, create a new hash salt for this. And for a local environment, that's not a big deal to reuse hash salts. It's just for a little extra security, but definitely once I start looking at putting this in production, I'm going to want to generate a hash salt and store it securely, because it is used for things like password generation and one-time login links and things like that. So some of these other variables tell the Drupal Docker image how to connect to the database. And also, since I have a Drupal code base, I'm telling the Drupal Docker image not to download Drupal, because otherwise it'll write over my code base and that would be silly. And the last thing is for local development, I'm sharing the code from my local computer to the var www/html directory. That's the directory that Apache is going to serve its content out of and PHP is going to run. So I'm going to share this directory that has this code into the container. If you wanted to, you could use this image for production. So if you go to pydramble.com, this website, pydramble, is actually running on a Docker container. Sometimes it's running on the cluster, which is in Kubernetes, so it's running on lots of Docker containers. Right now it's actually on a, I can't get the camera off of the stand, so I can't show you exactly, but it's in a little case like this on my desk, and it's running Docker and has this website and a few other things running on it. But anyway, it looks like that. Oh, I'll get to that in a second. Anyways, you could use this for production, to build a production Docker image if you wanted to. And you could use this Docker Compose and run it as a production server. But I'll get to that much later in this. It looks like it's copying things, copy scripts. There are no scripts. Why would it want to copy scripts? Let's see. That must have been something special I did in here. I wonder what this was for. Let me check really quick. The Docker file has copy scripts. What are the scripts? Oh, this is for Composer. This is for the old Composer project template. Apparently I have not updated pydramble.com recently. Luckily it's pretty much a static website, so if you do hack it, I can restore it pretty quickly. Let's see, so I can remove that. I don't need it at all. Let me make sure all the rest of this is good. I don't need pydramble settings. Actually, I'm going to put it to do for production. Use a new settings.php file. Jeff Geerling. We'll see what I want to do with that later. So it's going to copy all that in. It's going to install Drush launcher. I wonder if there's a new release. So another thing that you'll do a lot of times, like people make fun of people for grabbing code off of Stack Overflow and things like that, but people do that a lot, and it's not a bad thing if you know what you're doing. And I know that this code is good because I wrote it. That's always a good reason to know that code is good. But whenever you blindly copy and paste code, you should always check what it's doing and what it's downloading. I'm just making sure that I'm getting the latest version of Drush launcher. And it looks like this is the latest release. So that's fine. And then it's going to adjust the doc root to the web directory, and everything looks good here. All right, so I'm going to try building this Docker file again. Just running that build command. Somebody mentioned in chat they missed the initial part. I'll put in here, but I'll also mention that yes, all these streams will be available on YouTube afterwards. Should be up later this morning. Yep. Let's see. So this is doing, whenever you do a Docker build, it actually copies all of the files in the current directory into the Docker build context. So one thing that you'll, further along, there might be ways to optimize this build process by doing it slightly differently, so that you don't, every time that you build a new image, which we don't have to build a new image that often here, it's for local development. I'll probably keep the same image for a long while. But anyway, every time you do it, it has to copy all the files in, and it's very slow. A lot of the things, well, if you're on Docker for Mac, it's very slow. If you're on Docker for Linux, it's actually not quite as slow, but it's still not super fast. But Docker for Mac uses like a virtual OS X FS file system that's really slow with the way that it works. And so we'll just wait on this. So now it's also copying files across inside the container, and it's gonna do all that. While it's doing that, I'm gonna close this. We don't need to look at the Docker Compose. So this is the command to build the Docker image. I'm actually gonna change the format of this a little bit. Build the local Drupal Docker image. Oops. GitHub formatting is fun here, so it's that and that, okay. And then 2, start the local development environment with Docker Compose. That, okay. After environment is running, you can visit, I think it's just localhost Docker Compose. Yeah, it's running on port 80. You could change this, I could change it to like 8080 or something like that if I was running other local web stuff on here. But I'll just leave it at port 80 because on my Mac, I tend to take the philosophy of work on one thing at a time. A lot of people have the philosophy of, I have 14 projects running at the same time. There's 2 problems I have with that. One is my brain can't work that way. And 2 is your computer either has to have like 600 gigs of RAM or something like that to be able to run that many things. So I usually just, I use port 80 for almost everything, but I just have one project running at a time. So I work on jeffgehling.com and then I shelve that and shut it down and I work on something else. So, you know, with Docker nowadays, things can come up and go down so quickly. I see Chris is saying something about huge DDev fan. I am a fan too, but in this particular case, I just want something super dead simple that's a little less obtrusive. DDev is not very obtrusive, I should say, but it is more obtrusive because you have an extra command line utility and extra files and things like that. But maybe as a future follow-up, I can go through some of the different environments and things I like about them and things I don't like about them. With Drupal VM, I don't like the fact that it takes so long to start, but I do like that I can tweak my varnish config really easy and run Elasticsearch and do whatever other things I need to. All right, you can visit HTTP localhost and see site. So that's the setup to installing Drupal. So I'm going to also put in here the command to install Drupal. Yes, DDev is fast, that is for sure. All right, so waiting. Why is this taking so long? I mean, the answer is Composer, but I don't know why. Like usually this part is the fastest part of the whole process. Oh, it's actually still doing all the Docker stuff. I thought that was stuck on Composer. All right. So what was it just doing there? Is this a multi-stage build? Oh, it is. Ah, that's nice. So this is another quick note on the way that I use Docker. So I don't really want Composer sitting around in my production image, and this image can be used for production. So what I do is the first stage of this build, it uses a Composer base image to install all the Composer dependencies. And then after it finishes installing all the code using Composer, then it switches over to the Drupal image, and then it copies all the built code base stuff using this command into the code base directory. So that way I don't have extra junk sitting around in my production image. Now, for a development image, you don't need to do this kind of stuff. And a lot of the other utility like DDev and Lando and things probably don't do that kind of setup. But this was built for the Raspberry Pi Dramble website, which is using that container in production. So I do things to optimize the space and time and have fewer dependencies running on my production container. Oh, chat slow mode. I think I was setting things up, and Chris was mentioning here that he can't chat quickly. I don't know. I'm looking at the chat settings and I can't even see. This YouTube interface kills me. I don't know. I don't even know how to manage the chat settings. I know when I set it up, it let me set some settings and I was like, oh, chat mode, 60 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that. But I don't know how I can change that now because the interface that I'm seeing on my other monitor is not showing me any options for managing chat settings. I think you can only like set that when you set up the stream, which I set up a stream, but it was another stream and not this stream. So I don't even know how to get to that. I'll try to figure that out before the next one of these next week. Yes, tools that are hard to use. Just like Drupal. YouTube WTFs. I'll put that in the chat. You can't change it during the stream. Oh, that stinks. Oh well. Lessons learned for next time. As I said earlier, this is the first time I've ever tried live streaming, so the fact that it's actually working is pretty darn good. Earlier I'm using this tool called OBS. It's an open source live stream tool thing, and it had a setting for the stream quality, and it was like very fast, ultra fast, super, super fast or something. And there's no way to tell what it's actually doing or which one is better or worse. So you just have to play around with them. But I tried very fast and it was actually extremely slow and choppy. Come on. Yeah, Docker copies are not super speedy. And the funny thing is this is technically not even necessary. This is the step that it's on right now. Since we're going to be sharing this folder from my local computer, we're just going to, in the running container, it's going to blow this away and it'll be the local code shared in. So, oh well. But this is reality. I think I said somewhere on Twitter a week or two ago, like 95% of development is doing something, waiting for it to finish, and then seeing the problem and doing it over again, just like this. What is this? Config. Oh yeah, we don't. So I'm gonna change this. Copy config in place. All right, let's try building that again. Hopefully it'll pick up right here. But it has to copy all the files in. If I weren't doing live stream, this would be the part where I'd speed up the video a lot and you wouldn't have to see all this. Oh, so Daniel is saying in the live chat something about the GPU. The fun thing is I have one of these 13-inch MacBook Pros that doesn't have a GPU, so it doesn't, well, it has the Intel integrated one or whatever, but it's, the poor CPU I think is doing more work than it ever wanted to. Yeah, if you don't have a good GPU, you need it lower so it uses more CPU. Yeah. I was reading on the forums, it's funny a lot of times. It's funny, I'm a Mac guy, but I'm not married to it. And I've tried a couple times to go to Linux, and I have a Windows laptop sitting here too next to me. I will show you for proof. It is a Dell 13-inch XPS, which is a pretty good laptop. It's my favorite non-Apple laptop so far, but there's still a few things I don't like about it. But it's just funny that, like on the forums, when I was reading about how to make this open source software faster for the live stream, a lot of people are like, oh, just don't use a Mac. Don't even think about it. It's too hard and stuff. And I just think it's funny. Kind of like when you do Drupal versus WordPress or spaces versus tabs, Kubernetes versus, well, Kubernetes doesn't have any competition anymore besides like VMs and logical, simple infrastructure. This is almost done. Again, this step is not really necessary since we're doing development. It's going to be sharing the directory in. Yeah. The problem is if you go to Linux, so I'm using Mac, but if I go to Linux, then, if I choose Fedora, that puts me in one group of Linux people. If I choose Arch, then I have to brag about it all the time. If I choose like Gentoo or something, there's just every cult of Linux is a whole different weird ball game that you get into. But I did try Fedora last time, and I liked it a lot. But there were just so many little things. Like, you know, as I said, I'm a Mac guy, and I have a lot of Mac history. I use Final Cut Pro a lot, and I know all the keyboard shortcuts and things. I love Transmit for FTP. I know all its keyboard shortcuts. So there's a lot of that knowledge that I just kind of immediately lose. And I know that in Linux you can remap anything to anything, but I don't want to spend, you know, 6 months resetting my brain and all my shortcuts and things. Isn't there, so while this is doing this, Arch Linux meme, I think I saw this a couple days ago actually. It pops up sometimes. Yeah, this guy. It's so true though on Hacker News or on any other forum where people are talking about Linux distributions. You always see something like this, like, oh, Arch Linux is awesome. I use Arch. Arch is so cool. It is good. It's not a bad Linux distribution. It's just funny though, how it's kind of like Nix OS. Nix OS is a little more esoteric, I guess, but people who use Nix OS are always so like, oh, you should use Nix OS. Nix OS is awesome, all this kind of stuff, which, you know, I understand that you have to evangelize for it and all that, but it's kind of like when you're pushing it more than just offering the information. This has taken absolutely forever. The CPU is like 100. Here we go, finally. I just had to talk about it a little bit. It's downloading drush, adjusting the Docker root. Okay, we have a container once it removes itself. And now I should be able to run Docker Compose up. And let's see if it starts the environment. Another quick tip, if you're using Docker, you can always run Docker stats and it will run in the background and just show you any container running, the CPU usage, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times when I'm building Docker environments or messing around, I open up Docker stats to see if the containers are doing the things I expect them to do or to monitor usage. But you can also say Docker ps-a. It's going to show you any of the Docker containers that are running. Right now there are none because it's downloading MySQL. But I'm going to run Docker stats and see when these containers come up. Yes, I should clarify that I do actually use Linux for like every server that I've ever built in my life, and I'll show you. I literally have a pile of all of the current generation multi-core Raspberry Pis, which I use all the time with Debian. Well, it's Raspbian, so you know I'm sure there's some Debian person who's like, Raspbian's not Debian. And then I have extra ones sitting around here. I have my little time-lapse Pi that I plug in. So I use Linux a ton, but for my main workstation, I don't always. So now it looks like there's these servers are up. One thing you'll notice is MySQL is using a lot of CPU. I should probably switch to MariaDB at some point. Anyway, MySQL is using a lot of CPU, and that's because if I say Docker Compose logs, it's building out the initial database. Actually, I want to say -f to follow the logs. So this will show me any new logs that are coming. So it's saying that it looks like Apache is ready to serve. It looks like MySQL might be ready. And if I go to localhost now, so I'm following my directions here. Oh, it's still doing MySQL stuff. So it has to like start itself up and then initialize the database, and then it gets ready. And now it says it's ready for connections. So now I know MySQL's ready. The CPU is probably back down. That's good. And if I visit localhost, I should see the Drupal installer, hopefully. We'll see if that's the case. CPU is probably going crazy because it's loading all the files in the first time. And this is where Docker for Mac is a little slow because it's loading these files across the shared directory, which is not using NFS, which apparently DDEV does use NFS, which is faster. But all this is to say we're just trying to load Drupal, and we're getting close. This first episode of this live stream is creating a Drupal codebase and loading Drupal. So we have Drupal 8.8.2. Here's the installer. I can install using this interface. However, and this will be the last thing that we'll do on the live stream today, I want to automate everything as possible because I'm going to be doing things like reinstalling Drupal. I want to install it in a test environment so I can run integration tests, that kind of stuff. All these things I want to be able to do as quickly and automated as possible. So for the next episode, when I come in, I just want to say Docker compose up and install Drupal and get started right away. So I'm going to use drush for this. And you can install Drupal using the, the GUI, the install wizard. But we like to use drush for more automation. And composer, so it's docker compose exec Drupal. What's the name of the container? In the Docker, yeah, Drupal. And then what is the command that I want to run? It's drush site install, but I think I have the command here. And soon I'll also be adding this Docker configuration once I make sure that it all works correctly. Let me go to the next document here. Starting, configure the site. Docker compose up. I don't have the install. Here it is, drush site install. So this is the command I want to use. And when you're running commands through Docker directly, so this is one reason why you'd want to use something like ddev. It has wrappers for all this stuff, so you don't have to remember strange incantations like --c. But when I'm running through Docker Compose, if I have things like strings and special characters and things, it's easier to use --c to run this command through bash, kind of like a script through Docker exec on the Drupal container. And it's going to run drush site install. And this is the command for this. So I'm going to copy this command out from the PyDramble project and paste it in here. And Daniel says, are you going to stream all of this? And my intention is yes. My motivation is I've been waiting to migrate jeffgeerling.com for like 3 or 4 years now. And I figured if I do a live stream, I'll be forced to actually do it. So that's, and we can all fail together instead of me failing alone. So let's see, Docker compose except Drupal, site install minimal. That's the database URL, and the site name is, I think jeffgeerling.com is Jeff Geerling is the site name. I can check that in here. I don't remember. Everything changes. System site information. I think that's where it is. Jeff Geerling. Okay. Install from existing config. We are going to do that. To do add once we have configuration dumped. Because we don't have configuration for the site yet, because this is the first time we're ever installing it. So I'm going to run this Docker compose exec Drupal bash drush site install minimal using the minimal profile. I always build my sites from minimal. Some people build from standard or other profiles, but the thing I've found is I like having the minimum amount of Drupal possible and then adding on to it rather than getting a big structure of stuff and then taking away from it, because there's always little things that kind of screw up later in life that I've found. So anyway, I'm installing the minimal profile for jeffgeerling.com. And this takes, well, it usually takes a minute or two, but since my CPUs are already 100%, could take like 3 or 4. And then hopefully we'll be able to see my new Drupal 8 website, which will be so beautiful, and it'll look just like jeffgeerling.com in maybe a year. Someone's asking about running Joomla, and yes, you can run Joomla on Docker. I actually haven't touched Joomla at all for about 3 or 4 years, but when I last touched it, I did have it running on Docker. So I'm not the expert there. You'd have to ask in the Joomla community about that. It's still installing Drupal. If I were in the interface, it would have a little bar that would be showing me the progress of setting up all the modules and things. It's one little thing that would be nice to have someday in Drush maybe, but they have the libraries for that kind of thing, progress updates. Chris is saying something about core Drupal to Drupal migration. And so my intention here is I said in the beginning of this video, I don't know if you were here yet, but I said I have not done a Drupal migration project since 2016. So my knowledge is a little outdated. And back then, the core Drupal stuff was really not refined at all and not documented either, which was annoying. So what I'm going to try to do is figure out the best way to do it using Drupal's documentation. So as I said, we're going to fail together. We're going to see some of the holes, and maybe, I mean, one of the things that could come out of this is maybe there could be a little session on like things I've learned about trying to figure out how to do a Drupal migration at some Drupal camp or Drupal event coming up. So let me go to the site now. I'm going to go to localhost again, and it should come up with a Drupal site. And it's probably really beautiful because it's using the minimal install profile. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, as they say. Let's see how this, I don't know why it's going so slow here. Oh, I'm not seeing Docker stats. Yeah, it's doing a lot. The database is like, ow. There we are. Look at how beautiful this site is. Like, I have not seen a site that looks as, it's efficient, that's for sure. So drush pops out a login for you to use. So I'll log in like that. And I should have my new Drupal site. And look at this. I mean, this is, if you want a minimal site and something very efficient, you can't ask for more than that. The funny thing is in Drupal 7, the minimal profile actually had a little bit more in it, I think, than Drupal 8 does. Like this interface doesn't even have a message saying like, you don't have any content or anything like that. So at this point I have a local install, I have Drupal 8 running, and it's 11 o'clock US Central Time. So I'm gonna close things up, but the next session I'm going to start working on getting some content types in here and things like that. Or I guess the next step will probably be, as Chris said, work on doing a core-to-core migration, see how that works out, and see if there's anything special custom that I need to do. Because jeffgreener.com is not a super complicated website, but it does have 3 content types, and there's a few image fields and things like that we'll see how well they come across with automation. So now that I know that I have a local environment working, and now I know that I can install Drupal with this command, I'm going to commit all this new stuff, the Docker file, the Docker compose. So I'm going to say GS is my shortcut for git status, by the way. Muscle memory just does GS now. So I have those new files. I'm going to say git commit -m new Docker-based local development environment and instructions, and then push that up to my project. Now, another thing that I'm going to end up doing pretty soon, I hope at least, is setting up continuous integration so that in this code base, it can be doing things like installing jeffgreener.com every time I do a commit. And I might or might not, for personal projects, I sometimes do it, sometimes don't. I might or might not work through pull requests so that I can have like an issue and a pull request associated. Probably not, because this is a little more informal and it's just me. If there's ever a chance someone else would work on this code base, I might do something like that just so there's a better history. And the cool thing about that is that all the pull requests are stored on GitHub, so you can see like the progression of the site through there. You can still see it with Git commits, but it's not quite the same. Jay asks, how often will I be doing these? My plan is to do it every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, US Central Time. Sometimes it might be a little bit earlier. The nice thing is, I work from home, and on Tuesdays, everyone's gone, so it's nice and quiet. It's a little peaceful, and you don't hear a lot of sounds from, I'm in the basement. Upstairs above me is the schoolroom and playroom. So you won't hear all the crazy noise and stuff. So every Tuesday until it's done. That's my plan. We'll see how it works out. I've committed the site, the code base, and next time we'll start hopefully working on the actual migration process. And we'll also work through creating, what my hope is to upgrade my theme, but that will probably involve creating a new theme and then kind of reapplying the CSS to that new thing. And maybe I'll also do something like switch to a new layout model or something. We'll see. But thanks for being on today, and I will be, hopefully this video will go up on YouTube. What I really hope doesn't happen is I click stop and then it deletes the video. I don't know exactly what'll happen, but and Jay's asking about the Git repos. I'll be on this blog post that I have on my website. I'll be putting up this information, and what I might do is post this first session and then keep this post updated with future sessions and all the links and resources that I'm using throughout it. Because my intention is that this will, it's not going to turn into like a something 101 course, but it could turn into, maybe I'll write it up into a short book format or do something. I don't know. I could make a DVD set and send it to you or something. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for being on today, and I will see hopefully some of you guys again next Tuesday, and this video will be up on YouTube, hopefully, if it doesn't delete itself. We'll see how that works out. And definitely by next week, I'll have hopefully ironed out a few of these issues, and I won't be putting my my terminal right behind my face so you can't see what I'm doing. So see you guys.